Moving slow. There we go. All right. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Chris Muse and I are here today to talk about attachment and belonging. Before we talk about that, we have some programs coming up. One is a weekend immersion in January on ceremony, Eros ceremony and belonging. And then we have an ethics course. I always forget the name of it. The Source of Embodied Ethics. Is that what we're calling it? Okay.
Yep.
That begins in March. That's for practitioners of all things, not just somatic sex educators, diving into ethics and the source of ethics, which is belonging. And you can find all information about both of those and anything else we're offering on our website, which is instituteforeroticintelligence.com. Okay, so we've been on this track of talking about belonging for the last several weeks. I mean, it's been a lot longer than several weeks. We've been talking about it amongst ourselves for ever, it feels like, but we've started sharing more of those conversations here with all of you. And this conversation today is really us having a conversation. Like we're going to be actively answering questions that we don't necessarily have the answer to as we're here with.
I think it's more accurate to say we'll be exploring questions.
Great.
Instead of answering.
Them. Yeah, we'll be exploring them. We might come away with some answers. We might not. Probably we'll come away with more questions. And we really invite you to engage with us. So if you're watching now and you have a question, you can type it in the comments and we will we'll try and include it in, and it might spark a whole other stream of thoughts that we didn't even know were there. So please participate. Okay, any other disclaimers we want to make before we start?
No, just that, yeah, we're in the middle of this conversation. So we don't have answers and yeah, join us. So just The same thing you just said.
Awesome. So let's maybe start by defining what we mean by attachment. And belonging is maybe harder to define, which is part of what we're up to. But attachment, as we're mostly talking about it today, is the sort of Western idea of, it's not just Western, it's cross-cultural, but how it's applied, how it's understood and lived. There's a lot of variation from one culture to the next. But it's how our nervous systems learn to regulate themselves based on how we're cared for as infants. And this is coming out of my mouth in a weird way. And it, if our parents, if our caregivers, whoever's tending to us is attuned enough and paying attention enough and regulated enough in their nervous systems, it doesn't have to be perfect. Our nervous systems learn how to manage and work with whatever shows up. And so we have full access in our nervous systems to all the ways that we can respond. And we know how to resource ourselves through our caregivers and through the other humans around us.
And I would just add that yeah, it is, and that how that applies. It that's a thread that we carry through the rest of our lives. Now, certainly we can learn and grow and have new branches and new ways of relating, but this nervous system set that happens in early childhood is a way that we will tend towards our relationships, meeting the people in our lives for the rest of our lives. So it can be a really valuable thing, a way that we can know ourselves so that we can help others know us and our needs and what we may have to give and what we might need to receive.
Yeah, and it's really important, I think, to acknowledge that attachment happens in relationship. So it's not just something that we carry around. It's not a typology. It's it's based on how our nervous system feels with individual people. So you can have, when you're a kid, you can have secure attachment with one parent and insecure attachment with another. As an adult, you can earn secure attachment. You can, so much can happen for us to grow and change how our nervous systems are responding to the people that we're close with. Okay. There's a lot out there about attachment in the world, a lot of different resources. So go check it out. One of my favorites, it's like an attachment assessment online, is Diane Poole Heller's, that gives you a whole understanding, a whole pie chart of your attachment. I don't want to say style because it's more complex than that, but just what's happening.
Tendencies.
Yeah, great. Tendencies feels good. Okay, so that's attachment. And what we're wanting to explore today is how are attachment and belonging related? Are they related? Are they the same thing? What are they not related? Are they two completely different skills and capacities? What are these two things? Because they're both really essential to our existence as human beings. If we don't form some amount of healthy attachment when we're young, it's gonna have serious implications for our lives. And if it's really not happening, it can actually result in failure to thrive and ultimately death. So it's a really important thing. Belonging is a super important part of our existence as human beings, because for most of human history, if you didn't belong to a particular group of people, you were on your own and then likely to die. So these are like primal evolutionary needs hardwired into us. Okay, I'm going to shut up.
It's occurring to me hearing you say that in some ways our early attachment is one of the ways, anyway, that we can seed our belonging. So if I'm securely attached, and I would say that I was brought up relatively securely attached with an anxious kind of wing over there, but sometimes it's right here.
Like fighting, it's like,
yeah. That there was a way in which, because I experienced secure attachment, then there was a way that I belonged to my family, and in belonging to my family, I at least had the experience or the knowing of what belonging to something felt like. And so I haven't thought of this ever before, or just just in hearing you say, yeah, I'm just imagining that there is emergent, that there was a way that my belonging was somehow seeded, or at least was a shoot of growth that came through some early attachment, secure early attachment. But I also think that can be really dangerous, right? So that if I'm so identified with this family that I belong to, then I might have to basically like get in line and act the way that I'm being shown that I should act, or else then I lose this thing, my belonging to this family that I'm a part of. So I think it can be one of those tricky things. It can be helpful to the extent that it is, and then it can actually become a prison, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's true, we've sort of circled around this in our last conversation 2 weeks ago, is that there's so many different layers and kinds of belonging. Attachment's the way we're talking about it, is fairly discrete and definable, and there's not a lot of argument. Like, there's actual repeated studies demonstrating how this works and what happens with it. So it's fairly discrete and concrete, but belonging can mean so many different things. And it feels like we can belong to so many different groups as well. And I wonder if that's what we mean. Like, what do we mean when we're talking about belonging? That's a big question.
That is a big question. We've got pages and pages written about it. so
Yeah.
succinctly, there's something there around, our capacity to see, and then also to occupy and take residence up in our gifts, in the things that we were endowed with, that was just specifically ours to give. Well, that's an offshoot. If we know our belonging, then we have the capacity to do these things. How do we know our belonging? Maybe we've tested it. Maybe we've leaned back, and we've leaned forward, and we've stretched out, and we've gotten feedback, not from humans necessarily, but even from our breath that continues to breathe. We I think talk about that a lot. It's like that foundational piece of our belonging begins with, I just saw you take a breath.
I did. Yeah. I mean, I like what you're saying about the reciprocity, or there's something, you didn't use that word, but that there's a way that we can know our belonging through offering ourselves and through participation. I think of, like, we look at an ecosystem, and I can see trees out my window, and there's squirrels running all over these trees, and there's birds flying around, and there's other plants. I mean, there's tons of stuff that we can't see that's also happening, that's all part of this ecosystem. And they all have their place, and they're all essential. Like, the tree is helping the squirrel, but the squirrel is also helping the tree in some way. It's not just that the tree is a home for the squirrel. And because the squirrels grab, this one's sleeping on this branch or something, it's been there for a while, but they take the seeds, they take the however else trees drop their seeds, acorns, whatever it is, and they bury them to save them for later, and then they forget where they are, and some of them grow into new trees. So there's very much a reciprocal relationship happening between them. And there's something about that in our belonging that feels really important. For me, it's been getting to feel, for me, with belonging with humans has been really hard, which is different than you. Like, that's been a tricky place of, like, this part of me can belong over here with this group of people, and this part of me belongs with these people. And so there's been this sort of compartmentalizing of myself, which I think many of us, if not all of us, end up doing because our relationships with humans are so complex. But it's been in the realizing that, like, oh, like, I can be supporting other humans. I have something to offer other humans, which can be something as simple as just a kind word, to the person bagging my groceries or whatever it is, but just feeling that way that we are participating, that we're impacting and being impacted by other humans, and then also by this larger world that feels like such a significant part of it, or that feels like belonging. That feels like belonging.
Yeah. I love what you said there too. Even in that very human example of kindness, extending kindness to a stranger, or to your family, or to your friends, or to an animal. Give them a smile and a pet. Those kinds of things really, to me, to feel, when you say that, it feels like it engenders belonging. Like, I'm extending to you because I care, because you're a part of me in some kind of way, or I want to add something to your experience of living, and thereby there's a feedback loop that seems to get created there that can help to feed that sense of belonging, and of knowing, that's in that a small moment of belonging, and then in that larger way of knowing our genius and knowing our gift and being able to offer that to the world is related to knowing our place in the world, which, like, the place that only we can occupy, which then also kind of feeds that more individual, like, oh, and I belong here too, not just I'm gonna feed this and have you feeling good. And that there's like that seems like it's a little more vicarious in a way,
Mm,
or it feeds it in it feeds a different stream
mm,
than this sort of knowing our place
mhm,
and occupying it.
mhm. I definitely think it's going to be easier to do that for most people. Like if you grow up with secure attachment or secure enough attachment, it's going to be a lot easier to probably find your way to recognizing your particular place in the world. And when we say place, we don't mean like physical, um, concrete place. We mean the place in the world on all the layers and levels of the world,
Mhm.
spiritual, energetic, soulful, whatever layers you can think of that only you can occupy because only you have had the whole configuration of experiences and circumstances that you have had, and no one before and no one after will have the exact same ones ever. It's like a completely unique, magical thing. And so I think it's going to be a lot easier to recognize that and acknowledge it if you've you have if attachment came easily, or if attachment was available, if there was enough safety and care in your life as a young one.
Yeah, I can imagine that being yes, very tied.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but not impossible. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're not, you don't have to have one without the other or with the other.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, well, and I think that one of the ways that, you know, we people find our way to belonging when we're not finding a lot of belonging in our homes as young children is into the more than human world. Those of us who have the opportunity, to have, a little set of woods nearby, or even a park, or a backyard, or a place to kind of take to connect that's outside of human. And then
Mm-hmm.
that might just be another way to know our belonging, and then get to know our place
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, I mean, it feels like, we often, or sometimes, talk about attachment with the more than human world or the other than human world,
Mm-hmm.
because attachment is so human centric. And there's a little bit of, if that doesn't happen, you're screwed. And that is true to some degree. But there is a way that we can, um, that we need attachment beyond human beings, because human beings are so unreliable, just in the fact that they're going to die in a way that, like, the more than human world is going to always be available to us,
Mm-hmm.
even if our caregivers are not for some reason or other. Um, and humans are unreliable in small ways too, where they're just not always available to us when we need them,
Mm-hmm.
not in harmful ways, but just in a, like, yeah, like, we're humans, we can't be perfect. And so there's a way that belonging feels like it might, like, the attachment to the more than human world might fall into the bucket of belonging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What did you say earlier? Something like attachment sort of nested in
Yeah, they feel like
belonging.
nesting dolls,
Mm-hmm.
like our belonging is a much bigger, broader, like when I feel into it sort of somatically in myself, um, belonging feels far less personal than attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like belonging is the whole ocean. This isn't going to make total sense. This is a really sort of spirally way of talking about it. But belonging sort of feels like the whole ocean. And then attachment is more like an individual wave coming up that's contacting really particular, the shore in a really particular way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I'm with you totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of what it feels like in me.
Mm-hmm.
Like belonging is so big that even if all of the people that I'm close to, that I love so dearly, that I'm attached to, like in the attachment sense, not in the like I'm really attached to this person being in my life, but like these people are my people, my family. And if all of them, if all of you were to die, I would be absolutely devastated. And I would still be in contact with this other thing, with this belonging. And it's not the same,
Mm-mm.
but it would be holding me in a way that other humans in my life who I'm not don't have that kind of attachment with wouldn't would yeah.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you said that, because that feels like a good punctuation in a way that if if we are so tied, if our belonging is so tied to our attachment with one or two or five or this group of people, then it's fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think teasing it out in this way and saying, okay, attachment lives over here, and belonging can kind of come around it or be in relationship to it, but it's not, but the attachment isn't the be all end all, then it just, to me, it sort of neutralizes this idea of, well, I just don't belong. Well, maybe you don't belong to this, this club over here, but where do you belong? Where can we find our belonging and it can be so much bigger and broader than the people that are so very dear to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Having like 10 thoughts all at once. And um, I was thinking about people that I've met that have such a hard time finding where they belong, finding their people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's so much in that because there's so many barriers that we can have constructed against belonging because it can be so unsafe and so scary and so unsatisfying that we unconsciously, of course, construct barriers in ourselves to it. The same way we construct barriers to anything in life. Um, and then I was thinking about teenage girls or like high school and how belonging becomes so, or it can be so like clicky and specific, and how it feels like that's how most of us understand belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what that has to do with attachment. That it feels like two really different things there. Like
Uh-huh.
that kind of belonging and attachment feel like really distinct, but they're overlapping too. Still, I don't know. I feel more confused than when we started. How are you doing? Do you feel like we've
Yeah.
what have
Well,
we?
I think we probably should stop at here's pretty soon, because we could start going over here and over
Yeah.
there. Um, yeah. I'm feeling a little bit more clear than before when we said, let's talk about this. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
sure.
What
I'm
do you
not
feel
sure how we
clear
tie
about
these.
or more clear?
I think just about how beneficial it is to not consider belonging as a human centric thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though attachment often is. I mean, we're attached to our animals and things too, but in the way that we've been talking about
Yeah.
attachment, more human centric, that to me has felt like a really helpful distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And then especially with that example that you gave around, even if the tragedy happened and all the
Mm-hmm.
people that I love in my life were no longer in my life, I could still find belonging. So
Mm-hmm.
that there's something very like in the roots, foundational, seated there, that to get that being in a clique and then getting ostracized from it, you know that just is, it's just a flimsy, if we're hanging our belonging on that, it's just really fragile.
Mm-hmm.
So
Totally.
there's something about that that has landed for me there.
Yeah. I mean, this is so much of our work, our being the Institute for Erotic Intelligence and the Verdant Collective is getting outside of the very human centric understanding we have of the world.
Mhm.
And and looking at something greater than that, because we get so stuck. We have these sort of blinders or whatever on, where we don't actually see this whole thing, that there's a whole world occurring that doesn't really have anything to do with us, that we're a part of, but that would be happening, we're an integral part of, but it wouldn't, if I wasn't here looking at this squirrel that's still there in the tree, the squirrel would still be sitting there in the tree. Like, it's not dependent on me, it's not there for me. Anyway, this is just, it comes back to what the core of one of our foundational things is getting outside of that small view.
Right. And it's not at the expense of our human relations. It actually, it's so that we can come back and feed them as well. Maybe not so that, but it's interrelated, you know, that finding connection and belonging and, you know, listening out there in the more than human world can really inform our human relationships in beautiful ways. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, chew on that for a while. Let us know if you have questions or comments, questions, all of that are super welcome. You can do that. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can do that right there. It'll either be next to or below the video, depending on how you're watching it. And then you can also email us, info@instituteforeroticintelligence.com. And Muse checks those emails. So she will
respond.
Need response in some way or other. All right. So we're
Thanks
doing
for
every
joining.
other week.
Oh,
yeah.
Yep.
And we'll see you hopefully 2 weeks from today. Thanks for joining.
See you then. Bye.